Now it's good, having the candles up here. At the very least, that's a timer. You know that by the time the tablecloth catches on fire, I got to wrap things up. So. Feel a little nervous about that. Now, I love this time of year for all the various traditions, that we have in our families and wherever you're from, and some of them are a little bit different. One of my favorites is the potlatch tradition, Northwest Indian tribes. And basically, if you wanted to demonstrate to your friends and your neighbors that you are a really big, important Indian, you would invite them over to your house for a big party that you would throw. And you would put out all the best food you had, and then you would give out gifts to them. And you'd give expensive, and they'd keep a list, right, of all the expensive gifts, and everybody would say, oh yes, you're so great, you're so wealthy and generous and kind. And if you really wanted to demonstrate how much money you had, at the end of the party, you'd pile up even more stuff in the center of the building, and you'd burn the whole thing to the ground. And you'd be like, wow. And so, if you're looking to spice up your family traditions this year, and impress your relatives, just get ready, there's still more presents. No, it's okay. Come on out here, kids, and just flick a match on it and pay off your mortgage. They get a call from State Farm over that one. What does it take for us to give up the things that are valuable to us? We continue through the book of Genesis today. We're in Genesis chapter 21. Abraham was really old when God called him, and now he's really, really old. God keeps telling him, hey, I'm going to give you guys babies. And they've been waiting. Some 9 chapters now, waiting for the child to arrive. Genesis chapter 21, verse 1. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. You think about what the Bible is, and really it is an extensive recording of God making promises and doing exactly as he said he would do. In this case, the child is born. Remember last week God said, hey, this time I'm going to come back next year and you're going to have a baby. That happens. 25 years, give or take, of waiting and expectation, and the child has arrived. And this has got to be a continual witness to the people around them. Remember, they've got, shepherds tending their flocks and all these, people around them. And Abraham and Sarah believed God, but I guarantee you that didn't apply to everybody working for him. And I'm sure it was somewhat of a running joke, at least around some of them, like, oh yeah, they're going to have kids. And then as Sarah actually becomes pregnant, maybe some of the shepherds around talking like, man, is that like she had a big breakfast, or is she actually pregnant? And it happens, and the child is born. Listen to the joy here, verse 6. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Man, that's a special kind of joy. And here's the great thing. We all will get to experience that kind of joy on the last day. When the lost and the lonely and the hurting are found and brought into the presence of God forever and ever. And we will say that we have waited for this day. And God keeps his word. Here's the thing, though. The next chapter, God comes to Abraham again. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. That says, Isaac, your son, Isaac, the one that you love. This wasn't a day when Isaac spilled goat milk all over the nice rug. I've had it with you. No, Isaac, whom you love, and go offer him as a burnt offering. Now, Abraham was familiar with burnt offerings. All throughout the book of Genesis, when Abraham travels, he builds an altar to God, and he worships God, and part of that burnt offerings are a part of it. So he would take animals, and he would kill them, and he would offer them up on the altar to God. Except here, it's not an animal. He's now being commanded in no uncertain terms to do this with your son. I mean, think about it. We finally have the son that God promised us. Quarter of a century of waiting, right? Can finally see it being a possibility that all those promises about this land being ours, and if you can count the dust through the stars, that's how many descendants you're going to have. We see that it's within our grasp, and now you're telling me to do this. Not just death through accident, but by command. Not just, God, you striking them dead with a lightning bolt or something. You're asking me to do this with my own hands. I can imagine the temptation to bargain, right? Let someone else be the sacrifice. Let me be the sacrifice. But remember, though, that Abraham and Sarah, they'd already tried to, reinterpret God's promises with the whole Ishmael and Hagar thing. And so here, we're left recorded no argument from Abraham. Here's the next thing. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Do you want to know the character of Abraham? He woke up early to do this. Let me be just honest. Some of y'all wouldn't even wake up early if we moved service an hour earlier. Let me be honest with each other here. God says, Abraham, give up your kid, and he wakes up early the next morning to obey God. He cuts the wood himself. I imagine he's in a daze. Maybe the young man or Isaac or Sarah is asking him questions like, hey, where are we going? Why are we going to that place? What's wrong with you? Why are you so upset? They traveled for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Feel the tension building in the narrative. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. He took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. Perhaps each step of the way, Abraham is waiting to see if God would tell him to do otherwise, looking for some way out of this. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father, and he said, here I am, son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now, this is one of those cheesy daytime shows we would kick to next time on Father Abraham. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Remember that this was God's intention all along. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. I can't imagine the conversation when they got home. I bet you Sarah never let him go camping again. So, I mean, we read that, and you can understand well enough the flow of the story, the words involved, and yet there's part of this that we really struggle to grasp. What was Abraham thinking? You need to remember that at this point, basically all that Abraham knew about God was what God had decided to tell him. And nearly all of that centered around, Abraham, I'm giving you a kid. Multiple times, God appears to him, Abraham, I'm giving you a kid. I'm going to bless every nation on earth through you. Your descendants will fill this land and possess it. And so Abraham here's what he knows. I know that God has promised specifically Isaac that through him he's going to make a nation of people, right? I know that. And I also know that the same God just told me to do this, to offer him up and kill him. Faith sometimes means that you will be in the position of trusting God when he doesn't make sense to you. Some of you have been there. Some of you are there right now. Now, it may not be in this intense of a crisis, but you're going to hit a point in your life where you don't really get what God is doing. I was at that point last night. It's like, I don't know, 12 something in the morning, and Finn is just having a wretched night of sleep. And we're like, man, he's old enough. God, what are you doing? Are you trying to kill us? It feels like I want to die. Please just let this kid sleep. So, remember what Abraham says when he sees the mountain in the distance and he tells the men to wait. He says, I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Abraham believed that somehow the two of them would go up to the mountain and return together. It's made more explicit in the book of Hebrews that describes the heroes of the faith. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. He's ready to strike him down, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Here's what Abraham was thinking. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So as Abraham goes to strike Isaac down, apparently the thought going through his head, God knows what he's doing. He's going to keep his promises. I guess he's going to be raising him from the dead. Notice a phrase that's repeated here. Abraham was tested. We're told that at the beginning of the account of Genesis. After these things, God tested Abraham. Abraham had believed God already, right? God had called Abraham righteous because of his faith. Abraham had already obeyed God. He left the land of his fathers and he traveled to the land that God had told him. And yet God here chose to test him. God tested Abraham. He tested Job. He tested Peter. You know he's going to test you, right? It won't be in the same way. Real faith, the faith that saves, is faith that shows up in action. Here's what we're told in James. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. So Abraham didn't just say, oh yeah, God, I believe you. That faith in him was shown to be right because it produced this kind of radical, trusting obedience in Abraham's life. Now, this passage is interesting because as I've had conversations with Church of Christ pastors, every one of them at some point will tell me, and this is what they teach, that you are saved by works. They specifically teach that you must do good things in order for God to forgive you. And in the course of discussion, they always go to this verse and they say, well, you see, Abraham had to do good things. It says he was justified by works. But this isn't what James is saying at all. When did Abraham offer up Isaac? Was it before or after he had believed God and been considered righteous? It's after. Way after. So the sequence of events is Abraham believes God, and that faith is living in his life, and it produces these works. That's what it says. His faith was active along with his works. The faith that he had was completed by his works. So it's totally backwards then to say that, no, you've got to start by doing the good things before God will call you righteous. You tracking with me? So Abraham had already trusted God. He had been declared righteous then. And then he obeyed God because his faith was living and effective. Here's an example of what that looks like. When you got married, you took vows, right? We said things like, till death do us part, for richer and poorer. And do you mean those things when you said them? He was all smiling and happy on that day. And then one day, you wake up next to that beautiful person that you married, and they just roll over, and the breath of death just... Right? Do you mean it? Till death do us part? I mean, they don't throw morning breath in the vows, but it's going to happen. Do you know what Sarah has to deal with living with me? Don't give me a list, but I'm a compulsive fidgeter. I've got this little thing, I'm always like tapping on stuff. All day long. All the days of our lives. Scratch on something, tap. Aaron, stop! I mean, it's just continual that she has to deal with. And here's the thing. You live it out. And the way you live it out shows whether or not you really meant it when you said, till death do us part. Can I get an amen? Amen. You can come forward to the altar and you say, I believe you, God. But whether or not that faith is living or not will be shown by the life you live after that point. And here's the thing, Abraham lived it. That's what it means when it says that he was justified by works. This account raises other questions for us. Is God a monster? I mean, really, when you talk to atheists, this is especially the new breed of atheists, the angry ones, arrogant online Reddit trolls. This is one of the things they point at. Oh, God's clearly a moral monster. Tells you to kill your kids. Wait, you want to do what the Bible says? Go kill your kids. And they act as though God actually intended for Abraham to do this terrible thing. And you read the Bible, multiple other times God declares after this point that this kind of thing is detestable. Leviticus 18, do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So God has no intention that we should ever kill our kids, not even when they wake you up multiple times in the middle of the night. Not even when they hit the teenage years. Not even when 18 has gone and passed and he's still in the house with you. So God makes it very clear, this is not how you worship me. Is Abraham a monster, though? I mean, he takes his kid and he's ready to kill him. Can we admit? That's at least a little challenging to wrap our minds around. Abraham at this time did not know that God was opposed to this kind of thing. He didn't have the law of Leviticus. That was centuries later. What was the norm worldwide at the time was child sacrifice. You go look at the ruins of the Aztecs to contemporary ruins in that region at the time. Child sacrifice was a common practice. And so Abraham, in this conversation with God, God tells him to do something that is very similar to what's practiced probably by his neighbors. He's at least heard of it. And perhaps this is why Abraham agrees to it. See, we as Americans, modern day Christians, we come at this story from a mindset of like, I want the easiest path of following Jesus as possible, right? If I can get like automatic windows on this thing, right? I don't want to drive a manual following Christ. I can't drive a manual. I want comfort seats in this deal. Minimum sacrifice. The mindset that Abraham is surrounded by is totally different. See, all the pagans around Abraham, for them, there's a lot of gods out there, right? And so you got to work hard to get their attention. And if you do get their attention, the gods that you worship, like Molech, he's not really a pleasant character. And so he's not like automatically going to do what you ask him to do. You got to try and convince them to help you out. You got to persuade them to be on your side. And so part of that way of thinking is, if I give up something valuable to me, the more valuable, the better, I have a better chance of making the rains fall on my crops. And so if I'm really desperate, if I really want to try and just guarantee that Molech's going to answer me, I'll give up my son. And what God declares to Abraham, so he brings him through this journey, and at that last moment, he stops him, and he declares to him not just that that's not how you worship me, but he says, I provide the sacrifice. See, Abraham, I'm not like those other gods. I have already told you I'm on your side. I'm the one who came to you with this promise in the first place. I provide the sacrifice. And ultimately, what this is pointing to is what we're celebrating this time of year. Right? There's something incomplete in the whole thing. God sent his son, Jesus. Think of the imagery, right? We're told that Abraham put the wood of the sacrifice on the back of his son as Isaac climbs the mountain. You think God knew what he was doing there? The foreshadowing as Jesus carries the cross to his own execution. You have a father who willingly gives up his son, and a son who, I believe, willingly gets on the altar. Abraham's like 100 plus years old at this point. I don't think there's any way that goes down if Isaac is not a willing participant. Except it wouldn't be a human sacrifice, but God in the flesh. Fully God and fully man. And here's the incredible thing. Remember how God said, Abraham, I know that you trust me because you've not withheld your son from me? Look at what we're told in Romans 8. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? And as I've been wrestling over this, and one of the things in my mind is like, man, where am I going to land with this thing, right? Where are you going to land? Because, the preacher, the pastor, wants to tell you all, one, God's going to test you. Two, the Christian life, you want to follow God, it will involve sacrifice. You're going to come to a point in your life where God is going to call you to do something that is crazy difficult. He's going to call you to surrender some aspect of your life to him that feels central to who you are. But here's the truth, and this I think is the greater message. You need to remember when you're tested like that. You need to remember when you're called to sacrifice that anything we do like that is not to make God love us. I mean, that's a good way to convince retirees to send you, empty out their bank accounts and give you money. That's what prosperity preachers do on TV, right? They tell you, you know what, you want to get God to do something? You got to do something for God. You want to get God to heal you? You got to send me $10,000. Now, you can give me $10,000, sure. It's just you don't need to do that to get God on your side. Isn't that amazing? You don't need to impress God. You don't need to grab his attention. You don't need to win him over to your side because he's already done it. He says, I've already provided the sacrifice. That's already done. And not only that, he says, if he didn't spare Jesus for you, he's not going to hold anything back from you either. You don't need to make yourself worthy. So when we're called to sacrifice, it is always going to be a smaller reflection in gratitude and love of what God has already done for us. Just like the moon is a smaller, paler reflection of the sun. So we're called to join Jesus in suffering. We're called not to hold back any part of ourselves from him. But the reason we do it is because God did so much more for me. Will you trust him today? Will you not just worship him with your mouth or declare that he is Lord with your lips? Will you follow through in a faith that is living and produces radical obedience? If God has loved us like this, how can we do any different? As we pray and as we sing a song in closing, I want to invite you, if you've got something in your life that you know that God is just calling you to lay down before him, I encourage you to come forward and pray. If you want to be encouraged that God is already on your side, that he has already declared you his child the moment that you trusted in Christ, and you just want to be reassured in the presence of God that you don't need to win him over, come forward and pray. If you've never before trusted him, do so today. Let's pray. In the book of Micah, he says, God, what can I give you to atone for my sins? Were I to offer you rivers of oil or 1,000 animals or even my own child, yet you yourself have provided the sacrifice. God, you gave yourself up for us. So we're called to live in reflection of that. The work has been done. It was finished on the cross. You have declared yourself to be for us. Who can stand against us? So God, I pray that you would fix my mind on that when things are difficult. God, when I feel that my entire life is going up in flames, or that you're calling me to give up what is most precious to me, that I'd be so fixed on Christ that the exchange, I would see how worth it is. God, I could give up everything I have in this life, and if I still have you, it is enough. In the name of Jesus we pray.